Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
5 days until the election, the campaigns are getting tougher, the political rhetoric is getting hotter. With me now to sort through all of this are two people with sharp eyes for politics. Carl Jeffers is in Los Angeles. He's a radio host and a contributor to the Seattle Times. Welcome, sir. And Terry Jeffrey is in Washington. He edits Human Events. Let's talk about these two guys. We've got Rumsfeld and Cheney. Both have been criticized lately. Mr. Jeffers, first, your opinion. Should Rumsfeld stay or should he go?
Well, first of all, Don, and it's great to be back with Terry, my old sparring partner. It is absolutely nonsensical to even include Dick Cheney in the same discussion with Don Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney is the Vice President of the United States. Of course he's going to remain in office for the remainder of the term, and it's not even in dispute. Now, with respect to Don Rumsfeld, a lot of people don't realize Don Rumsfeld is not the problem that the American people are having with the Iraq war. And in fact, Don Rumsfeld himself said, when asked, did he approve of going into Iraq? And do you remember what his answer was? I was never asked. This was not Don Rumsfeld's war, and I will tell you this is all a political setup.
Yeah, what we're trying to figure, though, is really how the vice president is going to play into the re-election, not that should he stay or should he go.
Well, the vice president will play into the re-election by appealing to the conservative base because they love Dick Cheney because he's conservative on social issues and on moral issues. Don Rumsfeld has no record of conservatism on social and moral issues. I remember him as an Illinois congressman who stood, in fact, in favor of progress for civil rights.
Mr. Jeffrey, let me let you jump in here. What do you think of this?
Well, you know, I think that there's a point here that a lot of people are missing. The key to the solution in Iraq is not going to be what the military does, but Donald Rumsfeld is in charge of. The military has already done a spectacular job at its core task of invading Iraq and overthrowing the regime of Saddam Hussein. The president himself in his press conference last week said, a military solution alone will not stop the violence in Iraq. The ball is really in Condoleezza Rice's court, in the State Department's court, to get a political solution between the Sunnis, who are backing the insurgency that is fighting us now, and the government that is dominated by the Shias. Donald Rumsfeld and his military can't do that. If it's going to be done through the agency of the United States government, it's going to be Condoleezza Rice and her State Department. So I think it's really misplaced to direct criticism about what's going on in Iraq now at the military.
We said there's only 5 days. We know that until the midterm elections come. And just yesterday, we were talking about, everyone's wondering how the president, let's take a look. The president is actually in Billings, Montana today. We'll take a live look at him. He is campaigning there for Democrat, or rather for, who's he doing? Conrad Burns, Senator Conrad Burns, who is running against Democrat John Tester. So he's there. So folks are wondering, is he going to be good for the re-election or is he bad for the re-election? A lot of people are backing away from the president because his poll numbers are slipping.
Well, there's no question that the president has to pick and choose where he goes in the remaining 5 days. In Montana, where the president generally still has a somewhat favorable rating, even though it's still less than 50%, the reality is that he can help Conrad Burns. However, if you check the polls, Don, you'll see that John Tester is substantially ahead of Conrad Burns and will very likely pull out the Montana race. But it does make sense for the president to go there. I just want to add one final thought on Don Rumsfeld. The Republicans have put Don Rumsfeld out there as a bone to Republican candidates who are in trouble, because what they're saying to them is, if you need to separate yourself from the president, we don't want you attacking the president, but it's okay to go after Don Rumsfeld as a sacrificial lamb, and even if we win, it'll be okay, we'll understand that, but we do expect you to toe the line once the election's over.
All right, Mr. Jeffers, it's a good time to bring this in. Yesterday, John Bonner, U.S. representative, was on the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and he talked about Don Rumsfeld, and let's hear what he has to say, and I want to get your comments on the other side.
A few of your fellow Republicans have said in recent days, I don't like the guy. I simply don't think he is measured up on running the war in Iraq. Would I vote for a no-confidence resolution on Secretary Rumsfeld? Yes. Chris Shays, Republican of Connecticut. If I had my way, he wouldn't be Secretary of Defense now. I would have accepted his resignation after Abu Ghraib. I have lost confidence in him. That's the Republican candidate for the Senate from Washington State, Mike McGavick. And Congresswoman Joanne Davis, Republican of Virginia, is probably the only thing in my life I've ever agreed with Hillary Clinton about. He's probably a nice guy, but I don't think he's a great Secretary of Defense.
Wolf, I understand that, but let's not blame what's happening in Iraq on Rumsfeld.
But he's in charge of the military.
But the fact is, the generals on the ground are in charge, and he works closely with them and the president.
It's Boehner, but when you look at his name, it looks like Bonner. I always say that when I'm looking at his name. But let me ask you, Mr. Jeffrey, does it sound like he's blaming the generals instead of Don Rumsfeld?
Well, on the face of it, it sounds like that. I'm not sure that's what John Boehner meant, but if he did, it's just flat wrong. Don Rumsfeld is squarely in the chain of command between the President of the United States and the commanders in the field. But, addressing what those Republican politicians are saying, I would go back to my original point. Look, politically, the one reason the Republicans may lose Congress on Tuesday is because of public dissatisfaction with the Iraq war. And there's a tremendous amount of debate about what the military is doing in Iraq because the military is taking the casualties in Iraq. But even though it's our military that is taking the casualties, our military cannot solve the problem in Iraq. The problem in Iraq is a political one. The political portfolio is with the State Department. We have a plan right now that the administration is putting forward that's trying to bring reconciliation between the Shias and the Sunnis, but that isn't Donald Rumsfeld's job. That's Condoleezza Rice's job. That's Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad's job. And I think there ought to be a lot more debate and focus in our media and among our politicians about the political dynamics of Iraq and the surrounding countries in the Middle East and less on the military. Because if we're going to win it, it's going to be political, not military, and I wish our politicians would focus more there.
All right, guys, we're out of time, so I really need a yes-no answer to this. Will Kerry apologizing help the Democrats at all? Yes, no, please.
Well, certainly it helps to try to move this off of the political landscape. So the answer is yes.
It helps because it gets the story off the front page.
Yes,
Terry Jeffrey, Carl Jeffers, thank you both for joining us today in the CNN Newsroom.
Good to be here.
Developing story that we're working